The Inside Transportation Podcast is sponsored by Ford Motor Company. Built on the belief that freedom of movement drives human progress, from connectivity to autonomy, AI to machine learning, Ford has one simple goal: to improve mobility for its customers. To learn more about Ford's work in mobility, autonomous vehicles, and their corporate efforts to improve mobility for its customers, visit corporate.ford.com. That's corporate.ford.com. The Inside Transportation Podcast is also sponsored by Fenwick & West. Fenwick & West is one of the world's first and leading law firms dedicated to technology and transportation. Learn more about how Fenwick can help companies tackle the complex legal and business issues of autonomous transportation at fenwick.com. That's FENWICK.com. Hello, everyone. Hope you're all staying safe. This is the Inside Transportation Podcast, a production of Inside.com. My name is Johan Moreno, and I'm the writer of the Inside Transportation and Inside Electric Vehicles newsletters. And I am joined here by angel investor, Inside.com CEO, and Zoom yogi, Jason Calacanis.
We had a fun last podcast, huh? It went pretty well.
Yeah, I mean, and thanks to everyone who subscribed and rated our podcast. If you haven't caught our interview with Sandy Monroe of Monroe & Associates last week, I would take a listen. It was a really good conversation about Tesla and the electric vehicle space. And if you have any suggestions for anyone that you'd like to see interviewed on the podcast, go ahead and send me a tweet. My Twitter is @DudeJohan, and Jason's is @Jason. But before we jump into that, let's get into some of these news stories for the week. How about that, Jason?
Sounds great. Sounds great. I also liked learning about, his business itself, like how they run their business.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's fascinating how all these companies spend so much time dissecting vehicles and, selling all that data to different automakers and stuff like that. So it was a really interesting deep dive for sure.
He said he did one car on spec for $2 million, broke a car for $2 million. I was like, whoa, it's pretty great.
Yeah.
Sandy Monroe, really interesting content on YouTube. All right, let's get into it. What's going on this week?
Have you been ordering any takeout lately, Jason, or any delivery?
I have been at my office, Cloud Kitchens, Travis's new company, is across the street from us in San Francisco, and we get the Bel Campo burgers and some chicken strips that are pretty good.
Oh man, I love Bel Campo burger. I've had it before. It's delicious.
Bel Campo is ridiculous.
Yeah.
It's so great. And then picking it up is quite nice. They have a really good coronavirus protocol. There's a line across the street. Everybody's spaced out. They have lockers. You come in. You don't have to touch anything. Your name's on the board, and each of the lockers is numbered, but it doesn't have a lock on it. So you could just open it up and take anybody else's food, but obviously nobody's going to do that with cameras and everything. And you pay zero delivery fees. You just go there and pick it up, and it's across the street, and it's obviously faster than having to go meet some driver.
Right.
And it eliminates another person touching your food. So all of those things, I love and people don't know that in Uber Eats you can pick pickup. Mm-hmm. Most people think it's delivery only, but if you pick pickup, you're going to save a lot of money.
And it's kind of interesting that you mentioned that, because lately there's been a lot of controversy around food delivery services. I mean, obviously right now, demand for food delivery is at an all-time high, but with the spike also comes questions about how much delivery apps like Uber Eats, DoorDash, and GrubHub are keeping from each sale. Some restaurant owners have complained that these services, which have provided a crucial lifeline for a lot of these businesses, are offering little room to make a profit. One restaurant owner said Uber Eats takes as much as 30% of revenue. Some of these services have argued that they provide a marketing service to these restaurants while also paying drivers out. But a lot of this controversy kind of arose earlier this week when a viral tweet showed that GrubHub was paying out a restaurant about $376 worth of $1,000 in orders. And we'll put the tweet in the show notes, but basically they got a third of what they made.
Yeah, well, it's a little disingenuous too. You always have to be careful with these viral tweets and these receipts, because everybody knows I was an early Uber investor. And so I used to get people would show me receipts this person drove for 4 hours and they only got paid $30 and that's $7 an hour, whatever. And they'd be like, oh, okay, they drove somewhere and then there was some credit that was given because there was some dispute and the person, you're counting the 3 hours they had to drive back and there was a wildfire. Like literally every time this like receipt rage happens, you have to take a minute and pause and say, is this the average or is this, is this the standard or is this an outlier? Because the rage receipts tend to be outliers. And this one is an outlier, in fact, because if you look at it, there were 46 prepaid orders that generated $1,042 in revenue. So let's just put that number there on the side. So $1,000 will make it really easy for people to follow along here. Now, when you look at it, the commission was $206, which is 20%, right? That seems reasonable to me for providing this restaurant with customers. Then there was a delivery commission of $94. Okay, I don't know what the difference between those two things are, but I guess in Grubhub's world, the delivery commission rate, if Grubhub delivers your orders, this rate applies to your food. But I guess you don't have to use Grubhub. You could use your own delivery people, right?
Right.
So that puts us at $300, which is 30%, which seems standard. That's what the App Store charges. And 30% to me seems like a reasonable fee. Where it gets weird here is there's a promotions line on him for $231. This is something that the owner of the business opted into to market their service. And people don't know about this, but like Yelp, GrubHub, and I think DoorDash does it as well. I'm not sure if Uber Eats does. You can pay marketing every month to put yourself at the top of the list. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So that if you're looking at the statement right now, and we're going to drop it in the show notes, basically this marketing cost is under the promotions line. And it's about $231.
23%. That person opted in. They chose to spend marketing dollars. And then the next one is 7 order adjustment, which I think
kind
means
of interesting.
People send
I was kind of
food
curious
back,
about that
right?
one.
I think it doesn't say what that is, but I think that's when somebody ordered something and didn't get it. So if you take out those two, you're taking out $362, which is the 36%, netting out the 30%, which the whole controversy goes away. In other words, a restaurant need not promote to put themselves on the homepage. Why would a restaurant choose to give up 23% of their revenue? Well, they might be brand building. They might decide, you know what? I want everybody to know, or they might have a very high margin business. Might be a ramen store that says, you know what? Doing some marketing and building a name for ourselves is smart business, and we have such a high margin. We're looking at this as an investment to build the brand. So again, whenever you see something with a rage tweet or a rage receipt or a rage customer service issue, I always pause for a second and try to look holistically at it. I think this is much ado about nothing in the Grubhub receipt, but I do think there's a bigger issue of the sustainability of these businesses that I would love to get into.
Yeah, I mean,
but what are your thoughts?
Some of these delivery services argue that they're providing a marketing service to restaurants, right? And then you also have to realize, and this is something that I don't think people initially think about, is that there's a high cost to like executing these services, not just on the tech end, right? Because everything is kind of optimized on this customer experience, right? You want your food fast, you want it sent to you by like a dedicated person or and whatnot. And there's a substantial cost to that.
Absolutely.
I mean, because, what is it going to take for someone to get out and deliver food these days, right? You're going to have to pay them at least like, anywhere from, I guess, depending on where you live, anywhere between $15 to $25 an hour, right?
And that seems to be the rate that people are getting in the major cities, yes.
Right.
Which is a good rate, by the way. That's more than I think the Apple Store or Target or Starbucks pay.
Yeah, and then there's also like the time, like timing wise, right? You're not always going to be making $25 an hour, right? But when it's hot, when it's dinner time, and by the way, I know this because I used to deliver for Postmates back in the day, so I have a little experience there. Yeah, I do.
Well, when you were doing that, right? Like this is the other like insincere, intellectually dishonest argument. If you were working for Postmates, when you were working for it, Johan,
yes,
when you looked at how much money you made, if you sat there for 3 hours and got, 3 orders, did you look at it as the 3 hours divided by the 3 orders? If 2 of those hours you had no business and you were on your phone or reading a book?
I never saw it in terms of orders, right? It was always time. So if I went out for like 10 hours, because I would sometimes, because I was a college student, I was just trying to make some extra money, which I'm sure a lot of the people who, deliver for these services were in that same boat. Some people see it as full-time income, whatever. But, I'd go out for like 10 hours and I would pull in like a good, I don't know, $150, $170. And I divided it by hour, right? So I was making like $17 an hour, $19 an hour. And if you're...
What was your utilization in terms of your time? Were you working half the time, a third of the time on average?
Probably like half the time. And the other half...
What did you do with the other half the time? Doing what?
I'd just sit in the car and listen to the radio. That's what I would do. And relax.
Yeah, so this is where the debate is. So when people would come at me about Uber, I would be getting the statistics from Uber on how much they were paying per hour. They would be calculating it, and I don't know how they do it now. This is literally 10 years ago. They would be looking at that 10-hour period and saying, okay, you were working for us for 5 hours. Therefore, you made, in your case, if it was 17 to 19, let's just make it 18, the average of those two numbers, you would be making, in Uber's mind, you were making double that, $36 an hour. That's why they were advertising, hey, you're going to make like $36 an hour when you are working. You might look at it and say there's downtime, therefore I'm making half that amount, right?
Right.
And the truth is somewhere between those two, because you do get to reclaim that time and read a book or do some other work or listen to podcasts or whatever, which you might be doing at home if you were unemployed anyway. Mm-hmm. And so that's where I think this whole minimum wage and how much are people making. And I think now this has reached equilibrium in the market because the ride sharing pays people for the time going to pick somebody up, not for the return time, but the going to picking somebody up time, which kind of then I think takes that downtime and splits it in half between the platform and the individual.
Right. And one thing that did happen was San Francisco tried to help restaurant owners by placing a commission cap in your neck of the woods. So I think the cap was placed at 15%. And in response, Uber actually stopped delivering to Treasure Island in San Francisco.
Why lose money?
You might want to give me some more background because I'm not from the Bay Area. Tell me a little bit about Treasure Island specifically. Why do you think Uber
everybody knows the Golden Gate Bridge that goes from San Francisco up to the northern part of California where like Sonoma is and Napa. Mm-hmm. Then there's the Bay Bridge. Now that goes east to Oakland, Berkeley, and if you go further enough east, Tahoe and et cetera.
That's good to know. I never knew that.
So it's two bridges, right?
Yeah.
So one is the North Bridge and one is the East Bridge.
Right.
The East Bay Bridge is actually two bridges with an island in the middle called Treasure Island. When you're going halfway over the bridge, it's really weird. It's like, you can exit halfway off the bridge and do this big circle down to an island where people live. In other words, it is a pain in the neck to get to. Mm-hmm. So if you were to order from a restaurant in San Francisco, this would be like leaving Manhattan on the Brooklyn Bridge if the Brooklyn Bridge was 10 times longer and then going to an island between Manhattan and Brooklyn. You wouldn't do it, right? Mm-hmm. It adds a lot of cost. And I think this was Uber's way of kind of sticking it to the local politicians here, who Uber's uniquely qualified to do, in my experience. They're really good at mixing it up. And politicians really shouldn't be, in my mind, putting their thumb on the scale. Unless there was a competition problem, but there is not. You can use GrubHub, Postmates, DoorDash, Uber Eats, and then I'm seeing a lot as an investor, people building software for direct ordering from the restaurant to eliminate all fees and letting the restaurants deliver it. And I just had on my podcast This Week in Startups, the founder of Slice, which charges pizzerias just $2 per order, not a percentage.
Well, just
so
$2.
There is massive,
that's crazy.
Just $2 an order. Yeah, it's amazing. Plus the service fee,
mm-hmm.
which is like just passing along the 3% credit card fees. But anyway, long story short, government should not get involved in pricing or picking winners, because once you put the thumb on the scale, you'll have unintended consequences. And that's the issue here. It's sort of like the minimum wage. You want to have a great minimum wage, but you also have to think about the context of America being, living in New York and San Francisco is radically different than living in Nashville, Austin, or, the city that's even further out from those. And if you make a $15 minimum wage or a $20 minimum wage in, San Francisco or Seattle, that's going to be fine because you can sustain it. But if you put a $15 or $20 minimum wage in some other parts of the country, that might be unsustainable and those jobs would go away. So I'm not an economist, but I do think The government, when there's competition, should step back and let the free market decide.
But wouldn't you say that this is also an issue with user expectations, right? Because the way Uber Eats and Postmates and all these different services got so many users on the platform was because it was like, okay, $1.99 delivery fee, right?
Sure.
Or like $5 delivery fee. And these prices were probably set up as promo prices just to get people in the fold. And now that's become the expectation, right? Versus what it actually costs the restaurants and what it costs
100%
Uber.
correct.
And I think it's time to kind of realign like what these services should cost. Like if you want to get
100%.
food delivery, you have to pay for it. And
yeah, it's got to be at least $20 or something, you know, $10-20 to get food delivered in a major city. And this can vary because some food is high margin. Therefore, the margin is baked into the price of the food. I mentioned before, like ramen might be, where it's noodles and sauce, you know, and an egg. Other stuff might not have, a burger might not have the same margin, right? And so this is where the free market is really good at hashing these things out. A high-end restaurant, which has to use a lot of packaging and has very expensive teams, they might charge a lot for delivery. And then somebody doing pizza or ramen might offer free delivery. And viva la différence, let the market decide. And the great irony here is that, you know, journalists and the public have been, some sections of the public, been criticizing the money-losing Silicon Valley companies. That's been the narrative. Mm-hmm. So now you have companies attempting to not go out of business during a crisis because demand is spiking and charging enough to not lose money. And now they're getting criticized for doing that. And at the same time, you're criticizing them for not paying the drivers enough and that ongoing debate. And they're raising prices so they can also get drivers on the road. Because let's face it, drivers on the front line, we talked about that in a previous episode. You need to pay them more. So again, to your point, the customer does need to pay more. And I think I've been giving, you know, very large tips. I'm lucky enough to do that, be able to do that. But I've also seen in Uber Eats and other services the ability to give like $2 or $5 directly to the restaurant. I don't know if you've seen that, and then they're matching those. Mm-hmm. So I do think like the ability to donate, and I tweeted at Jeff Bezos and I emailed him saying, why don't we have the ability to tip our Amazon driver? I would set a 10-20% tip for every Amazon package coming, or put in a $5 or $10 tip just for every box that comes. I can afford to do that. I know they're taking a risk. And, you know, if only 1 in 5 customers does that and they deliver to 20 customers a day, it could wind up being an extra 20, 30, 40 bucks a day, which might be very significant. You said you made 150, 200 a day. That extra 30 bucks could be a really great, bonus.
A nice little boost. And one thing I will say before we go off to break is it's kind of interesting because the playing field is leveled right now. I mean, if you're a small mom and pop restaurant, I mean, and obviously, you know, a bigger chain restaurant might throw all this money into marketing. But I mean, at this point, I kind of see that there's a more level playing field between like mom and pop restaurants and big boys, right? Because
well, I mean, yeah, they can't even operate. The big players are just shutting down right now because keeping 100, 200 seat restaurant open to do 30 deliveries a day doesn't work. But if you have a 20 seat place, it actually kind of does. It's counterintuitive, right?
Yeah. Well, hey, when we come back from break, we're going to be talking about transportation habits changing after COVID-19. We're going to look into the results of a study from IBM here on the Inside Transportation podcast. We'll be right back.
Hey, everybody. Just want to let you know that this episode of Inside Transportation is sponsored by our friends at the Ford Motor Company. Built on the belief that freedom of movement drives human progress from connectivity to autonomy, Ford has one simple goal, and that's to improve the mobility of its customers. Ford has been using technology to shape the future of transportation for over 100 years and is dedicated to solving the world's most pressing mobility issues. What you might not know is that Ford has a series of divisions that make these visions a reality. Ford X is Ford's venture incubator that unites entrepreneurs, designers, and engineers to shape the future of transportation. Ford's City Innovations team brings innovative ideas to life through community workshops, crowdsourcing initiatives, and citywide mobility challenges. And Spin, a property of Ford, brings e-scooter sharing to cities and college campuses. So here's your call to action. To learn more about Ford's work in mobility, autonomous vehicles, and their global efforts to improve mobility for its customers, visit corporate.ford.com. That's corporate.ford.com. Thanks again to Ford for sponsoring independent media like this podcast.
And we're back here on the Inside Transportation Podcast. Johan Moreno, Jason Calacanis, running through some of the week's most important transportation stories. We're going to keep going here with transportation habits changing after COVID-19. IBM surveyed 17,000 people who gave some insights on how they might change their transportation habits after COVID-19. 20% said they no longer plan to take public transportation. So this means buses, trains, and subways. Another 28% said they planned on taking public transit less frequently. And also, more than 17% of those who responded to the survey said they would use their vehicle more often as a result of COVID-19, with 1 in 4 saying they would use it as an exclusive mode of transportation. So I guess the question here that I have for you, Jason, is do you think all of these survey respondents are just feeling this way because of the current situation? And these trends are probably going to change once there's a vaccine? Because I think it'll be common to see mass and temperature checks with public transit, but I don't think this is going to change transportation trends in some areas like New York, right? You're not going to see a ton more people have their own personal cars and drive around more populous areas like Manhattan. So I'm kind of curious to see what you have to say about this.
Yeah, so I do think that surveying people in the middle of a pandemic has some inherent fear in it, some understandable fear, right? Like, oh my God, This is going to change forever. But as we saw after 9/11, the financial crisis, the dot-com bust, the last 3 or 4 really horrible challenges we've had as a nation, not much changed. So the question is here, is this time different? And sometimes this time is different. This time does, in fact, feel different. We've never had 9/11 was an acute situation in New York City, but the rest of the country, as bad as they felt about it, they kind of sprung back very quickly, whereas New York, it took time. This is the opposite. Like, everybody around the world is being impacted almost universally. Almost nobody has been spared from being sheltered in place, et cetera. So this could be different. What I do think is that the New York City, and this is just a theory, but I'm starting to hear it more and more, transportation was a key piece of the spread of this disease. First, on airplanes, and obviously we did not anticipate when we shut down the flights from China that China was not the place to worry about, that Italy and Europe was the place to worry about, and that those places come into New York City and Chicago,
right? Yeah.
Where outbreaks were very severe. So how would you ever know that? It's a Chinese-born disease. It came out of China. I know that's controversial to say, but it's just a fact, right. So please don't at me. Like, I'm not calling it the Wuhan virus, but, it also did come from Wuhan. Yeah, it's just the origin. Calm down. It's so ridiculous that people can't even speak about this objectively without people blowing a gasket and being virtual signaling snowflakes.
The Twitter PC culture.
It's bonkers. Though the virus that originated in Wuhan, China, you would think would have come here from China. It did not. It came from Europe. Mm-hmm. Then where did it go to? It went to a place where 6 million people a day get on tiny tubes in which 10 or 20 people get on and off every platform, and the average ride is probably a dozen, I would say 8 to 12 stops. In other words, you're circulating people in a dense environment underground, and this thing dies in sunlight, according to reports. So, and the New York City subway system is almost universally underground,
right?
And it's packed, and it's got velocity of people coming on and off of it. It is the perfect breeding system. Nobody can understand why New York City got hit to a level that other places didn't. It's density. It's the subway. It's so obvious and clear as day to me, having been a New Yorker and been on those subways. When they talk about the proximity of spittle and like the air, and you watch those videos with the infrared showing sneezes, mm-hmm. You've seen those videos on YouTube now?
Yeah.
I'm sure. When I was on the New York City subway system, you were touching at rush hour 2 or 3 people unintentionally. You would have one person on one shoulder tapping you, another person on the other. Your hand on the dirty pole would be touching another person's hand.
Right.
you were constantly touching people, and you could smell people's breath. You could smell 2 or 3 people's breath.
Right.
I mean, I know this is getting graphic. I don't want to trigger
Well,
you,
it's
Johan,
the way of life, right? Living in New York City,
that
you're
is
used
the way
to
of
it.
life in New
Yeah.
York City. Now, when you go to Japan, I don't know if you've ever been, people are wearing masks proactively on the subway. Some people wear them every day because of this reason, and they're packed just as tightly. That's what happened here. So I do think that people are going to look at the subway very differently, and that we're going to have to think about, for the year maybe after this, spacing out usage of the subway, maybe letting, some people or get on the subway, or a certain number of people get on at each stop, and maybe having a queue where people are going to have to decide, do I want to get on this thing at rush hour because I might have to wait half an hour to get on the platform, and they only let a certain number of people on the platform at a time.
So Jason,
the
I mean, in
trains
terms
empty.
of people riding the subway in New York City, right? And I've been a few times. I when I was there, I was a little bougie. I just took the taxi and Ubers like the whole time. I had actually never. I think I stepped into a subway once. And
It's fantastic.
It
The
was
service
not
is
that
fantastic.
crowded, but besides like the subway, I mean, how else can you really get around in New York City? Like what alternatives would even be
Buses.
presented?
There are commuter buses, so they're expensive though. So like $6, $7, $8 each way. So people coming from Brooklyn or Staten Island will take a commuter bus, like a nice coach style bus, and then other people bike and scooter and those kind of things. But obviously you have snow and rain and cold, where in the winter you do not want to get on a bicycle in the winter. Certainly, when there's snow and ice, you're not getting on a bicycle. Although I used to ride my Vespa in the snow sometimes in the rain. But I was a maniac 20-something. But yeah, no, New York requires it. I think what the survey doesn't take into account is how many companies are going to allow people to stay remote. Because this is the real key issue for me as a business owner myself, or other small business owners, for running a pizzeria, you're running a business. Do you really want your keyboard jockey employees to come to work? No. Do you really want to risk it? No. Do you want to be the one responsible for sending, let's say you were a newspaper like the New York Times. Do you want to have everybody come back to the office and then there's an outbreak at the New York Times and you made the decision that people who could have worked from home easily got on the subway from Brooklyn and Queens and Williamsburg, whatever, and they got coronavirus, God forbid? I think a lot of business owners are going to just shelf 2020 if their people work behind keyboards, and then everybody else will go back to work. And then depending on what happens, I saw today at the taping of this on May 4th, that we were down to 200 people dying in New York City, which is tragic and horrible. But I remember when the number, I don't know if you watch Cuomo's briefings, which are excellent. He always starts with the numbers, and he's really self-deprecating and straight up and honest and hardworking, all the things that, make you love New Yorkers. And when I remember when it was at 900, just thinking to myself, when it was going up, please God, don't let this go to 9,000, because I remember 3,000 people dying on 9/11. I just did the math. I was like, 3 days of this is a 9/11. Every 3 days of this is going to be a 9/11.
Yeah.
How can any society sustain a 9/11 every 3 days? And thank God, praise Jesus. I'm an atheist, but praise Jesus that we are now at 200 a day and falling. And if the number gets to 20, and I am an optimist. I think the people are going to wear the mask. They're going to distance. They're going to wash their hands. They're not going to touch the poles on the subway. They're going to wear gloves. They're going to space out. And some people are going to work from home. So I think, and 20% of people in New York have it according to the early testing. That means those people, in all likelihood, we don't know this for perfectly, will be blockers. In other words, they won't transfer the disease. I think New York's going to get through it, and I think it's going to get through it quicker than people think.
Yeah, and
I'm an optimist.
A number here just sent to us by producer Nick. So just to compare San Francisco's annual ridership versus New York's. So San Francisco gets about 125 million annual riders. New York's subway system gets 1.7 billion riders. So you can see the magnitude of how big New York's transit system is. Another thing I was going to mention, because you had mentioned 9/11 briefly. So 18% of those surveyed in 2002, so this was right after 9/11, said they were very afraid of airline travel. And then just 4 years later, that number decreased to 10%. So
of course.
I think, like you said, initially, there's going to be a lot of skepticism about getting onto these public transit systems, ride hailing, airplanes, there's going to be some apprehension. But then once we get a vaccine, once things calm down, I think things are going to go back to normal, which is kind of interesting.
I believe that as well. I remember after 9/11, it might be slightly controversial, people were getting on airlines, walking up and down the aisles, looking for Muslim males in a certain age range and reporting them to the flight attendants. I saw this happen where people were going up and down and saying, I think this person's suspicious. And the entire dialogue was see something, say something. Remember that?
Yeah, I remember.
Of like point something out if you see something. They were basically saying point out people who you think might be groups of terrorists. And there were all these reports. If you go back and do searches of, it would be 3 Middle Eastern people or people who looked Middle Eastern coming back from, Colombia and going home to, Chicago or something on a flight. And because they were 3 people who looked like they fit the profile of the 9/11 hijackers, they would get questioned. And here we are, or even 4 or 5 years later, people are like, the TSA is so dumb. This is so ridiculous. And why are we doing this? There's no terrorist attacks. And so people do have a short memory. The thing that I think will not be a short memory is working from home, because people are now getting an education in remote work and which positions it works for. And it works so well for certain positions like a writer or a customer support person that the arduous nature of a commute, let's say commutes over 2 hours a day, 1 hour each way, both employers and employees are going to say, you know what, let's split that 2 hours. I'll work from home. You give me a setup at home. I'll put a little extra time in, or we'll all just save money. And then that's going to lead to more globalization. In other words, 90% of companies did not believe in remote work in my experience. Only like these weird, Matt Mullenweg at WordPress or some really unique companies believed in this and
right.
They made it their thing. But most companies did not believe in it. Now, since 100% are forced to do it, this is going to be the big sea change.
Yes, and I have a theory I want to share here on the
Okay.
podcast.
Love a good theory.
With work at home, right? This is my vision for the future.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone who's working in New York and LA right now and all these major hubs, San Francisco, they're going to say, hey, I'm working from home, 4 days a week, 3 days a week out of the week. I just want to go full remote. I'm going to move like 200 miles away from here. Or
100%.
Yeah, or like 50 miles away from here. I'm going to get a really nice house because I can't afford that in LA or in
100%.
San Francisco. And I'm just going to work remotely. And when I have to go to the big city, if I want to go enjoy myself, if I want to go to a concert, if I want to go to a work meeting, because I'm sure from time to time there will still be work meetings or conferences, I'm going to get into my Tesla that's going to drive me automatically to the office, and I can just read a book, watch a movie. By the way, I don't think this is a very original vision because I've heard this expressed before by many people.
That's 100%. And maybe you'll grab an Airbnb in the city because there'll be more places available and hotels will be cheaper again. And staying overnight in San Francisco or New York might become a $100 proposition. And so you might be like, you know what? I'll work from home 4 days a week. I'll go in on Wednesday. I'll stay over. It'll cost me $100. It'll come out of my pocket. It doesn't have to come out of my employer's pocket. I'll do Thursday as well. And on Monday, Tuesday, Friday, I'll work from St. Louis Obispo. Or we're seeing it in Sacramento here, which is 75 miles, I think, 80 miles outside of San Francisco. I'm seeing it in Napa and Healdsburg and other places north of the city. It's actually becoming this long distance commuting for short number of trips per week is, I think, the future. And there are actually in Southern California, I got pitched on these a whole bunch of times, commuter airlines coming out. So imagine you live in Lake Arrowhead and you fly into, Van Nuys or
Burbank,
in the old days, I guess, or Burbank, Santa Monica Airport. I think Santa Monica is going to be shut down, I heard. But, these little commuter flights going from the Orange County up to Van Nuys or whatever, working, and Surf Air is another company that does this. So those are going to be very interesting, too, as these little commuter turboprops.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how all of that develops. But it's time for another break here. And after a few words from our sponsors, we're going to be talking about some auto dealers who are saying they are running out of pickup trucks. So there's a little bit of a supply issue. Yeah, in COVID times. We'll be talking more about that on the Inside Transportation podcast when we come back.
Hey, everybody, let me take a moment to thank Fenwick and West. They're one of the world's first and leading law firms dedicated to technology and life sciences. They operate in the fast lane of innovation where ideas often outpace changes in the law. That's where you find Fenwick's autonomous transportation and shared mobility practice, steering startups, technology giants, and major automotive companies through rapidly evolving legal, business, and regulatory challenges, which we talk about here on Inside Transportation all the time. A Silicon Valley original, Fenwick is a national law firm with offices in Mountain View, San Francisco, Seattle, New York, Santa Monica, and even Shanghai. So here's your call to action. Learn more about how Fenwick can help companies tackle the complex legal and business issues of autonomous transportation at fenwick.com. That's FENWICK.com. Thanks again to Fenwick for providing great legal services to me. I use them personally for our investments, and for supporting independent media like Inside Transportation. Let's get back to this amazing episode.
And we're back here on the Inside Transportation podcast. Jason Calacanis, Johan Moreno. We're just chopping it up here on some of the hottest transportation news and trends. One of them being pickup trucks. Jason, what do you think about pickup trucks in general? Do you have a pickup truck? Do you want one? What are some of your thoughts there?
It's a great question. I have been enjoying going skiing in Tahoe with my 10-year-old daughter the last couple of years. And last year, the 2 times we went, I was in the Tesla Model 3 both times. The Model X one time and the Model 3 the other time. And there were massive snowstorms, in fact, blizzards, and all the roads were closed and there were avalanches. So even if you had a four-wheel drive truck, you were in better shape, but you still couldn't get out. And then the four-wheel drive trucks with chains and everything could get out. Then we got out next. Anyway, long story short, I was thinking about getting like a little cabin out there. And I've been looking and researching trucks. And I like this Jeep. There's like a Jeep Wrangler pickup truck. I'm not sure what they call it, but it's got like a pickup truck in the back. And then obviously I like the Cyber truck. I've been thinking about that one. And I've always loved the Land Rover Defenders. We talked about that in the last podcast. Yeah. And I'm kind of torn on it. They said it's the most technically sophisticated one, but I have this dream of driving in snow when other people can't. Like and having like a Wrangler or something. I've always wanted to do that. I've always wanted to drive by a bunch of cars that couldn't get it done, you know? Feels like a real manly, like cool thing to do. Go skiing when other people are stuck on the side of the road. Get what do they call that? A wench? The wench in the front and just hook it up to some car that's off the side of the road and help them get out. I want to do that. So yeah, I have been thinking about it, and I've been looking at some of the old versions of some of these things. So yeah, I like it. But why on earth would there be a shortage at a time when everybody's under massive financial duress? And that's confounding to me.
Yeah. So just some background here. Auto sales have been down about 50% in the U.S. in general.
Okay,
right? So we're
sense.
talking about trucks, SUVs, sedans.
Mm-hmm.
So year over year, they were down 50% in April. Dealers are starting to see a recovery, though, because all these automakers like GM and I believe Ford, so the American automakers, have primarily been offering 84-month 0% APR offers to push out cars. Yeah.
Wait, how many years is 84 months?
It's like 7 years, right?
wait. So 0% interest and 7-year loan?
Yeah. 7 years.
Wow.
So 84 months.
That's juicy. I don't need that loan, but I might take it anyway.
That's the thing, right? Is that they did like an analysis, and I think like a quarter of all purchases are taking these loans. Previously, and I might be misquoting this number, but it was somewhere around like 5 to 10%. Previously, like consumers taking 0% loans on these cars, right? So there's been a really big rush for people to buy trucks right now because trucks are really expensive. Like a good pickup truck will probably cost you up to $100,000, right?
Wait, how did that happen? I thought when I saw this pickup truck thing, I thought, oh, pickup truck is like, 20, 30, 40 grand. And then somebody told me, like, are you an idiot? They're like $80,000. Like, how is a pickup truck $80,000? What justifies that? And then I talked to a friend of mine. He said, that's where all the margin is in cars.
Yes, the options.
It's sort of like the iPhone of cars is these pickup trucks. Why is the pickup truck more expensive than a car? Is it better engine or something? Or just they can charge?
No, it's all the customization and options that you can add to the truck, right? So at the end of it all, I know this because I've worked with a lot of auto dealers and I have a lot of dealers as friends. their margin comes from all the accessories and everything that you can bundle together into that car. And they tell you, hey, if you bundle everything when you're buying the car, you can roll it into your monthly purchase, right? So it's rolled into that 84-month.
Got it.
No, anyway. But one dealer who actually operates dealerships in Colorado and Florida said they only had a 30-day supply of the Chevrolet Silverado, which is one of Chevy's top pickup trucks. And the most sought-after pickup trucks are becoming harder to find because of a few reasons, actually, not just because COVID-19 has shut down all of the assembly lines for the automakers.
That's the obvious reason.
Yeah, but also last year, I don't know if you remember, but there was a United Auto Workers GM strike that happened in like October, I believe. And that shut down plants for a whole month. So they've already been kind of behind on production. Some insights from auto dealers. These people are interested in the product. They've been cooped up. They've done their research. So a lot of these buyers are just going in, picking up the car, signing the paperwork, and leaving, which is great for the auto dealer because they're not interacting with so many people, just kind of kicking the tires. So America's obviously in love with the pickup truck. Another thing that's happening next year is that Tesla and Rivian are coming out with their pickup trucks.
Wait! I thought is the Cybertruck coming out next year or 2 years?
So it's slated for production next year. So in 2021.
Wow.
So we're going to start seeing some Cybertrucks hopefully get off of the assembly line by 2021. Rivian is also a big electric. I don't know if we've actually spoken about Rivian on the podcast yet, but
they're good looking. I saw it in the newsletter, and the interior was not as good looking to me as the Model X with the captain's chairs, but it was good looking in white. I thought it was a good looking car.
Yeah.
You like it?
Oh, I love Rivian. I mean, if I could get one, and if I had the money, if they were available, I would absolutely get one. I mean,
what do they cost?
They start at about $65K. They haven't finalized a lot of the pricing yet, but it's going to cost around $65K. And then I think they're going to have all the incentives that are no longer available to Tesla vehicles, at least federally. But anyway, my question to you is okay, everyone loves pickup trucks, but we see these different models coming out from Tesla and Rivian. I mean, do you think that the buyer of a Chevrolet Silverado is going to be the same buyer as, a Tesla Cybertruck? And I think we briefly mentioned this or talked about this last week with Sandy. But I'm kind of curious what some of your thoughts are as far as who's actually going to be buying the Cybertruck.
Yeah, I think Sandy's comments were interesting. He does think they're two different markets, but he does think he's one of the crossover people. And so I think that this is a situation where the pie gets bigger. So I have noticed in San Francisco, some of these city slickers liking to have a pickup truck in their armada in their fleets. People have 2 or 3 cars because you're California, you got driveways, whatever. And so I see people picking up junkers or having a second car. That's a pickup truck, for weekend warriors or going to Tahoe, whatever it is. And so, yeah, I do think that we could be entering a new muscle car era. I feel like the pickup trucks are like the modern day muscle cars. If you want to have power or whatever, instead of getting, a Mustang or a Camaro or whatever, you get a pickup truck, right? That's like the raw power. And the utility of it's great. And with gas prices getting cheap and there being an electric version, for me, that means you get both segments. The people who love gas and ice engines and who love the fact that I heard gasoline's like $1.50 in some places.
It's really cheap.
A gallon?
Yeah.
That's unbelievable. I mean, it's a problem for the ozone layer, obviously. But there's a bunch of people like me who are never going to buy an ice engine again. I mean, I really got tempted with the Corvette C8. I love Corvettes, and everybody's going crazy and looks so good as a convertible.
But you're staying true to the cause.
It's really hard for me. I'll be totally honest. I mean, I almost feel like I want to just have one. I just want to have a Corvette again for a year, but I'm just going to wait one more year, and hopefully the C9 or C10 comes out electric, and I can buy a Corvette again this lifetime. But I'm not. I was actually thinking of buying an old Corvette, like a '70s Corvette, just for the fun of it, because I was thinking that, in the downturn there might be more available because they were getting pretty hot, and just not worth the price in my mind. So anyway,
it's a nice quarantine project.
But, I did a search on it. I was like, muscle cars, prices, during pandemic or whatever. And one of them said that the prices went up because more people, to your point, are doing research online.
Yeah.
So it seems like people's free time leads to them being able to make that considered purchase and might actually drive more e-commerce. So who knows? It's so hard to figure out what's going on in the world right now, right?
Yeah, and I think the people that are buying pickup trucks right now, taking advantage of these crazy offers. I mean, a 7-year loan at 0% is pretty insane.
It's bonkers.
But people probably already had like a pickup truck purchase in mind, so they're like, you know what?
It just got them off the fence.
Yeah, it's just like, hey, I'll just go for it, because even if I lose my job, I can afford to make the payments because I'm not paying the interest.
Yeah, it's going to be $200 a month, $300 a month payment, right? So
right, yeah,
it's not going to be that bad. It might also be people being preppers too, right? Like I have been thinking about prepper stuff, since this happened, obviously, and we had rolling blackouts here in California, as you probably know, and so I got a generator, like a gasoline generator. And then I was looking into getting a diesel generator for my house and getting the solar panels and the power wall, so that if the system goes down, I have both the, 1 or 2 days of the power wall. And if we had an extended thing, you can get for like $5,000, like a diesel generator on the side of your house. That'll run indefinitely if you just keep getting more diesel fuel. So I was looking at all of that. And then I was thinking, wait a second, in an actual, get out of Dodge situation, what would it be better to have? A Tesla or a gas power car? And, it would seem to me that, there are advantages to both. I don't know what you think. What would you rather have in the zombie apocalypse, gas or electric?
I'm going to say gas.
Why?
It's easier to just put gas in your car and start driving, right? Versus waiting. Yep. Even if you're waiting, like if we're talking zombie apocalypse, which is the exact situation you presented right now. But if we're just talking zombie apocalypse and you need a rush, you need to go. I mean, what does it take you? Like 2 minutes to fill up your tank? It doesn't take that much. I mean, right. But here, to the contrary though, right? I'm going to throw this in. If you were escaping a zombie apocalypse, there would be a long line at the gas station, most likely.
Correct.
So
filled with zombies.
Right. So
and that's the problem.
Now the Tesla purchase actually sounds like a good idea. So
See, I think in the short term gas is better because you can go further, right? You can just get a couple of tanks of gas and put it in your trunk, right? And fill up your gas tank from your trunk if you were lucky enough to get gas. However, in year 2 of the zombie apocalypse, when all the gas is gone and everybody's doing that, tube and doing the suctioning stuff and trying to siphon gas out, you're going to feel pretty smart for finding some solar panels and charging your car every 30 days and then going out on a run and coming back because your car works forever. Right. If you have solar panels.
Yeah. And I will say there is one, and the reason why I like Rivian, and, I'm sure over the course of these podcasts, I'll unveil a little bit more on why I think Rivian's, a top player in this space, but they're actually creating like a really cool peer-to-peer charging network. Or charging protocol where if, let's say, you're out in the desert and you need a charge from someone, you'd actually be able to link up your charging cable to another car or vice versa.
What is that, like an inverter or something?
Yeah. And that's awesome. Like
the Cybertruck has that, by the way. So remember he said you could plug in a generator or something and you had the inverter.
What I like about the Cybertruck too is that you could easily just sleep in the back if you're talking zombie apocalypse.
Perfect for also for the zombie apocalypse, I think those sharp angles when you're, going through a horde are going to deflect them off of there. And the Rivian's got a flat front, which I think that means you're going to get a lot of zombies under the hood.
Right, yeah. And I'm inviting
if you can put a cattle, you got to put a snowplow on the front of the Rivian and you're fine.
I'm inviting all our listeners, if you're listening to this right now, email johan@inside.com. What is your zombie apocalypse getaway car? And
what's your ride? Zombie rides. It's a new feature.
Zombie
which
rides.
is but one type of apocalypse. Like, what if we just had
well, it feels like we're already going through an actual apocalypse. I mean
yeah, I know, but it's not like the car you drive impacts the coronavirus in any way. Like, with the exception of the fact that I do have the biohazard mode on my Model X, which when I drive my wife has the Model X, and when I drive hers, I always put it on that because the air gets so clean that it's like being in a clean room. Have you ever been in one?
No, I haven't.
Where they have the HEPA?
No.
You ever been in a really like sterile environment where they have like a great air filter in the room?
No, you're talking like a hospital, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I've been inside of a hospital.
some places just have like really good air filtration. So I have like these IQ Air. When I was in LA, we lived near the highway, so we had these IQ Airs in every room, and the air quality in our house was ridiculously high quality, like literally safe room, like making silicon chips clean.
Oh wow!
And that's what it's like when you're in that car. You can really actually, I can tell
the difference
when I take a deep breath. Yeah, it feels clean in your nose, and I don't know, and I could feel it when I had the IQ Air on because I have asthma, and it really is something to see, like how powerful that is in the Model X, the biohazard mode. Now, I don't know if it protects against the coronavirus, but at some point they'll probably test it.
But I'm sure at a certain point it helps, right? Kind of going on to the next topic here. So layoffs have been affecting Uber, Lyft, and Lime. Uber is considering laying off about 20% of its staff. The move would probably save the company about $1 billion, it's estimating, but these layoffs haven't been finalized yet and would likely happen in stages. They're proposing about cutting a little more over 5,000 of their 27,000 employees. Lyft is kind of responding with similar, job cuts. They're reducing about 17% of their workforce. About 982 of the company's 4,000 employees would be laid off. Some of those layoffs are in the form of furloughs. And Lime, which is the scooter sharing company, is also reducing its workforce by another 13%, which is, at this point is 80 employees of the company's 1,300 employees, or roughly 1,300 employees will be left go. Earlier this year, the company cut about 100 employees and pulled out of 12 markets. One thing to note is that Uber previously said it had enough cash to survive through the pandemic and would still have money in the bank. Why are we seeing so many layoffs from these transportation companies while they still have cash in the bank? Jason, as somebody who's run, many businesses, I kind of want to pick your brain and see what's some of the strategy behind laying off all these workers. If there's, confidence from both brands that they'd be able to get back into business after the pandemic and thrive.
Yeah, it's abundance of caution is one thing, and then not wasting a crisis to get rid of low-performing employees is the unspoken topic that occurs. So let me explain that. There are people like Jack Welch who felt you cut 5% of your employee workforce, I believe was his number. Somebody will correct me if I'm wrong. He would do performance reviews, and they just cut the bottom 5%. It was like a standard he asked all of his managers to do. Just, if you got 200 people on your team, you're getting rid of, 10 of them every year who are the lowest performers. And it's just a healthy way to run a high-performance company. Seems pretty cutthroat, right?
Yeah.
And it is. And the dialogue I hear from founders, because I'm obviously an angel investor in companies, is the dialogue goes something like this. We have 18 months of runway. We want to get it to 24 just in case there's a second or third wave of this, and it goes longer than we expected. And of that, bottom 20%, half of them are not the high performers. You're obviously not cutting the high performers when you do this. And all of these companies tend to be they tend to have more employees than they need. And so the reason you do that is in a growing market, you want to not have people burn out. You want to have extra capacity in order to take on new projects opportunistically. So you build up redundancy, which is important for resiliency, and you want to have the ability to do projects. So let's take Inside.com. We have less researchers and journalists than we need right now. We're trying to find some, and we'll be opportunistic during the downturn, obviously. But most companies, like if you were Vox or you were Business Insider, well, that's owned by a big company. But if you're Vox, Vice, BuzzFeed, and let's say you were going for growth, right? You had venture money, you were going for growth, you were going big. You might say, you know what? Cutting the bottom 20% is not going to change our revenue, but it will change our expense. So we can't make more money, but we can spend less. And so this is like the cutthroat, candid conversation that you don't hear in press releases, and journalists are never going to talk about because, frankly, journalists, no offense to you, Johan, journalists are not inside. Well, no, it's one of the things that, I get a little bit tweaked out about because I used to be a journalist and then an editor and now a business owner, or, was kind of all three of those things at the same time. the inside discussion is really about this. Hey, let's get rid of the low performers. If we don't know what our revenue growth is going to be, at least we can control our spend. So let's cut the spend. Let's cut the low performers. Let's lean on the high performers, right? So what's going to happen in all these organizations is the high performers are going to be asked to take on more work. The low performers are going to be cut. The runway is going to be extended. And then you can always start, going for growth and having additional capacity later. That's really what the dialogue is internally. Now, I'm not saying I endorse any of this or don't endorse it. I'm just being candid with you about, you asked me what the decision-making process is.
Right.
That's what's happening at board level. That's what happens when the HR person, the CFO, and the CEO leave the building and go for a walk and get a cup of coffee. That's actually what they're doing. They're looking at the departments and saying, you know what, we just hired this person for $150K a year, and they're not actually bringing it. And their number two who's getting paid $90,000 a year, that person can do their work. This person's just a name. They just look good on our website. They're not actually bringing the thunder. Let's cut them, right? And so there's this very tactical, strategic, who's a low performer, who's a high performer, and it's literally like trading baseball cards in the boardroom. People are just cutting. And this is the thing that's been terrorizing for me and keeping me up at night. I haven't been able to sleep. I've been having a little bit of a sleep problem because I don't have to just worry about inside in my investment company launch. I have 150 portfolio companies. I'm talking to the founders, and I'm watching some companies furlough everybody or cut half the team. And these are people who they were in board meetings last year saying, you're not going to believe this person. We got this all-star. I need your permission to spend an extra $50K a year on this person. But, if we don't get them, they're going to go to Google, or they have 3 job offers. And the same person that they were lobbying the board to overpay is now being cut like in a heartbeat.
Wow.
And this is why people who are, stay at home forever, the stay at home forever crowd, stay at home until there's a cure, which is, 18 months to 18 years from now. Like literally people think, like this could be 18 years before we have a vaccine.
Right. Or
it could be 18 months. Who knows? Nobody knows. The people who are taking shelter in place to the extreme, like, are typically people who work behind a keyboard like you and I and are not at risk. Mm-hmm. But the other folks are at risk. And it's not just restaurant owners. It's not just Uber and Lyft and DoorDash drivers anymore. It's literally, if this goes on for another 3 months, you're going to see the middle class get wiped out. And then if it goes on for 12 months, the same keyboard jockeys who are more than willing to tell people they're idiots for wanting to go back and that they're insensitive and that lives matter more than livelihoods, that crowd of liberal elite keyboard jockeys is going to lose their jobs.
Right. And that has an effect on like Uber and Lyft because they're the ones taking those rides. And I'm going to present this.
They're taking Uber Black.
Yeah. And I'm going to present the situation to you. Do you think that if we see a smaller Uber or a smaller Lyft, there's going to be a point where they just merge operations?
I think the likely scenario, I don't think you'll see Uber buy Lyft. I do think that a Lyft, a DoorDash, and Postmates, some of that cohort could combine and then lower costs. So imagine if you took all of Postmates and you combined it with Lyft and DoorDash. You took those 3 companies. Mm-hmm. Well, you don't need 3 CFOs. You don't need 3 CEOs, right? You just put all the accounts together. You pick whichever brand speaks the most to people, and then the other brands go away, and it'd be Lyft, DoorDash, or it'd be DoorDash would be the overarching brand, and Lyft would get, subsumed into DoorDash. Those both seem to be about the same valuation, 7-8 billion. So that's a more likely scenario. But I do think if Uber stays under 60 billion in market cap, I think that Amazon buys them.
Wow. Spoken from Jason Calacanis, the man himself.
You're really good at this, by the way. I really like our time together. I feel like I learn so much when we do this because, it's not transportation, with the exception of the Uber investment, is not my wheelhouse. It's yours. And I really always learn something. So I really appreciate this time we have together.
Right. Well, one thing you're about to learn is, not really learn, but one thing I want your opinion on is today's Dope or Nope.
Okay, here we go.
This is a segment where we decide whether something is dope or nope. And today we have the Xpeng P7 sedan. And Jason, tell me dope or nope before I kind of explain the background of this vehicle.
Nope. I've seen this vehicle 10 years ago. It was an Aston Martin, or looks like a slightly elongated Model S that I've owned for a decade. It's a hard nope for me. The inside is uninspired and boring. This looks derivative, and
kind of looks like
yeah,
a Fisker, no? Like a Fisker, like an
yeah,
earlier
it's
Fisker
somewhere.
Karma?
It's like if the Fisker Karma, which was disgusting, in my mind, I thought it was gross. If the disastrous Fisker and a Model S and a Aston Martin were put on the, in Photoshop, and somebody did a bad job of blending them together, this is the result. It's a hard nope for me. Xpeng P7 garbage.
Don't look it
Not
up
interested.
yet, but I'm going to ask you this.
I'm not.
Okay.
I don't know what the specs are on this. I mean, maybe it goes 1,000 miles and has 0 to 60 in 1 second, and it flies. It goes submerged.
How much do you
But
think
on the aesthetics, no.
How much do you think this car costs?
Well, can I ask you what the battery range is in miles?
Okay, yes. So I'm going to tell you this. The P7 can travel up to 438 miles on a single charge. And this is according to China's ministry. They just opened it up for sale. So they opened it up
400-mile range.
438. But it's based on China's Ministry of Industry and Information's range rating. So those are not like, if you're comparing EPA to MIT ratings, I mean, EPA ratings are a lot more accurate.
So maybe it's more like 320 or something.
Right. It hasn't been rated yet by the EPA, but
I'm shocked that the CCP would put out bad data. But putting that aside, it is China.
Yes, and the company received permission to actually test this vehicle on U.S. roads earlier this year, but there hasn't been any indication yet that they're going to sell it. But you never know, right? Anyway, I'm
going to say 50. I'm going to say 50,000.
50,000.
Same price as the Model 3. I don't think they'll hit it, but I'm going to say it's a $50,000.
Are you going to say that after subsidies or before subsidies?
I was going to say that before subsidies because it is made in China. I'm just saying, I think in China they sell it for $50,000 before subsidies.
Okay.
I think it's $50,000.
So just for reference, subsidies in China is like $4,000 off. So Jason's putting his bet in at $45,000 for this car.
46, yep.
Just a little bit more reference. The Model 3 long range is rated at 414 miles by MIT. So this vehicle is actually rated like 15 miles more than the Model 3
so the
long
same.
range.
Right. And that's a $60,000 car, correct?
Yeah, it's like $50,000 in China after subsidies. Okay. So this vehicle costs $36,000.
Wow.
Yeah.
Significantly less, $10K less than I thought.
Right.
So I guess the safety is another issue here and the build quality, but it doesn't have self-driving, obviously. So
that's the other thing. So a former Tesla employee who went to go work for Xpeng admitted he uploaded autopilot source code to iCloud last year that he was probably going to bring to Xpeng. So
what? And China is going to allow this? And they built a factory there?
I mean, the thing is that he was at, and this is like a long story, very short. But this engineer was working at Tesla. He went to go work for Xpeng, and like literally before he went on the flight to go to China, they like captured him. Like the government was already onto him for doing this.
Wow.
So there was a lot of good like recon, I guess, on Tesla's end that this was happening. But yeah, I mean, Xpeng is one of the more promising like EV startups in China.
Great. Awesome.
And they already opened this car up for sale this week. Deliveries are expected later this year, so in the fall. But yeah, interesting that you thought this was a $50,000 car. Yeah, it looks like a $50,000 car.
Well, wait, is it a nope or dope for you?
Nope.
Forget about the price for a second.
Okay, if I'm just looking
do it the same way I did.
Okay, I'm brainwashing myself, and I'm going to forget everything I just told you.
I'm just imagine it's a $50,000 car, and aesthetically, what would you pay? Was it nope or dope at $50K?
At $50K. Nope. It's just not inspiring. Like, it just looks like every other electric vehicle that's coming out on the market.
Totally derivative.
And
now, at $36K, the price is dope.
Yeah. And if it goes like 400 miles on a charge, then...
That's super dope.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I like that.
It's a nope, then
dope. If you look at the interior, look at that nice little screen in the center. I like that. It looks nice.
Yeah. I like the floating one from Tesla better.
What about that display that's behind the wheel? Do you like the fact that Tesla doesn't have that in the 3 and in the Y?
I'll be honest about that. I would like there to be a monitor there. I do understand why they're not doing it, because they think it's going to be self-driving eventually, and everybody will be looking at the center screen to watch Netflix. But I prefer to be able to look down and see that. What I ultimately prefer is the heads-up display that I had in my Corvette C6, which put the gear you're in, your RPMs, and your speed floating on the windshield.
Oh, yeah.
So you didn't have to take your eyes off the road. I don't know why don't all cars have that mandatory?
Well, they have an aftermarket kit where you can actually install a heads-up display.
What's that called?
So I think they actually have one for Tesla. They should look up.
They do?
Can
we talk about that next week? I'm going to buy that. Hey, does somebody take a note? Buy that for me and install it on my computer.
I'll look it up for you. I'll send it to you.
Yeah, send it to me because I want that.
Yeah.
No, here's the thing. If we really want to have people keep their eyes on the road, let them see on that projector in front of them the last text message that came in, the speed, etc. Because people look at their text messages anyway, and if the text message just displayed there for a couple of seconds, you're looking through it. I don't think it distracts you. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. Does anybody do that? Put the text messages up there?
I'm going to send you something in the Slack real quick for you to see, and I'm going to put it in the show notes for all our listeners. But Volkswagen they're coming out with the ID3, which is their big, this is going to be Volkswagen's
look at
Model
that.
3, right?
Yeah.
They actually have a built-in heads-up display as an option.
I see it.
Where if, let's say, you have the navigation on, it actually displays it
tells
on
you the turn.
Windshield.
So much better.
And I mean, I thought that was awesome. I think this car is actually going to be really cool to see how it kind of plays out. Sadly,
what do you think about putting the music up there and, changing the radio station or seeing your last text message?
That's freaking awesome.
Because
I love that.
But would that be, if you put the text message up there, would that be distracting or not? Like if you put 140 characters up there, I don't think it's distracting, but I guess it's more distracting than not having it.
Yeah, I mean, my only reservation there is that most voice systems, except for Alexa for some reason, they have a lot of trouble deciphering what you're actually saying. So even if I had the option to, reply to a
I'm just
text
saying
message,
just for reading. Forget about
no, that's awesome. Yeah, I would love to.
Would that be allowed to show it there, or is that not allowed? Like, what's the law in terms of what you can put on that heads-up display? I wonder. That's a good note for you. Why don't you answer that question in the next Inside Transportation?
I will. And
what can you put on that? What are the rules around heads-up displays?
Yes, we're gonna look into it. And if I have to consult,
isn't there
an expert,
a rule for looking down to your what is when you look down at your navigation or you look down at your radio? There's a certain amount of time they say you're allowed to glance down. Do you know what that is? Because there's some tests that they do where entering information into your navigation is not allowed, but changing the size of the screen or changing the radio station is.
I didn't know that.
There's some amount of look it up because it'd be a good dialogue for us to have about distractedness because there is some inherent distraction in changing the radio, right? We're looking down and changing the temperature, and I wonder how, which agency would be responsible for that in the United States?
Yeah, it might be state by state too.
Yeah.
So there might be we should look legislation into that for Texas and California and whatnot. But next episode of Inside Transportation, we will have more information on that.
Okay.
And that's a wrap. I mean, we're here at time.
All right, great job.
Thanks so much, Jason, for participating in this
pleasure.
lively conversation of all these different transportation topics. Just a reminder to subscribe to our newsletters, Inside Transportation and Inside Electric Vehicles. You can find them at inside.com. Any closing words, Jason?
No, I'm really enjoying doing this, and thanks everybody for tuning in, and thanks to our sponsors for making it possible. I'm having the time of my life, and I'm learning a lot.
Great.
At Inside, we're looking for some researchers. So if you know anybody who's looking for a gig,
yes,
you can email freelance at inside.com. Freelance at inside.com. We're looking for researchers, really. So there's journalists who come with a lot of baggage and who write very beautiful prose. What we need is we're kind of more of a research company and more analytics. So we're looking for people with a little more. If I had to pick between like the ability to write beautiful prose versus the ability to surface great information and data, I'm going to go with the latter, right? Which is what we're trying to do in these newsletters, is really make you smarter by reading them.
Yes, all remote, and
all remote.
Let's all rally together to be here for each other in these times of need. So if you know anyone
100.
who is looking for something, freelance@insight.com. Is that the email?
Than's. Yeah, that's it.
All right.
Because what we typically do is we'll give some people some freelance work, and if it works out, then we hire them full time.
Yeah, that's awesome.
You're freelance, right?
Yes, I am a freelance. And that's it for the Inside Transportation podcast. Thanks so much, Jason.
Awesome.